It has been 8 years since the release of Total War Warhammer 2. Today we will look back at the history of Warhammer 2 and see if it is still worth your time 8 years later. Total War Warhammer 2 was developed by Creative Assembly, a UK-based studio. Tam Mansell founded Creative Assembly in 1987. Early in their history, they focused on porting games, but later worked with Electronic Arts to produce games for their EA Sports brand. In 1999, Creative Assembly began producing Shogun Total War, one of their first commercial successes. Total War became a major title under the Creative Assembly brand. In March 2005, Sega acquired Creative Assembly and became a part of Sega Europe. They also opened an Australian branch in Queensland. With their acquisition by Sega, they expanded their Total War brand and branched into the console market. In September 2017, the studio released Total War Warhammer 2, the second game in their Warhammer franchise. Sega, the Japanese parent company of Creative Assembly, published Warhammer 2. The game released to favorable reviews. Critics at the time praised the factions, gameplay, and campaigns available at release. Many were also fans of how the endgame felt, along with the improvements to the user interface from the previous Warhammer game. However, several of the complaints were around the poor diplomacy system and the high system requirements that required heavy CPU performance. Warhammer 2 was nominated and won several awards in 2017. IGN nominated it for the Best PC Game and Best Strategy Game of the Year. PC Gamer nominated it for Game of the Year, but it failed to win. It won PC Gamer's Best Strategy Game category. In Eurogamer's Top 50 Games of 2017, it ranked within the top 10. Total War Warhammer 2 has seen long-term support, including many paid and free DLC packs. 1 month after release, on October 26, 2017, they released Immortal Empires. Immortal Empires was a new campaign for those who owned both the first Warhammer and the newest one. Initially, the DLC was exclusive to owners of both Total War Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. As of December 2025, that restriction was lifted, and access is now granted to all purchasers of Warhammer 2. It included the ability to play the new campaign as any legendary lord from both games and the owned DLC. While the main campaign follows a narrative experience, this new campaign allows players to have the original sandbox experience of Total War, allowing expansion without limits. October also included the Blood for the Blood God 2 paid DLC, which included blood and gore effects in battle. Released in October 2017, the DLC is set at $2.99 USD. It currently sits at a mostly negative rating on Steam, with only 39% of people recommending it. Reviewers mostly find it frustrating that gore costs an extra $3, believing that it should be free for all game owners. In December, they released the free laboratory mode that allowed for custom battles with changeable sliders. The new year, in January 2018, they saw the release of the paid Rise of the Tomb Kings DLC, adding an entirely new playable race into the campaign and multiplayer. This DLC's objective is played in the Eye of the Vortex campaign. However, it does not focus on the Vortex like the main campaign does. Instead, according to the Steam page, players seek the 9 cursed books of Nagash, a search culminating in an epic battle at the Black Pyramid of Nagash itself. Each of these books grants a unique campaign bonus and puts the player a step further along the road to victory. The DLC includes several new lords. The DLC sits at a very positive 83% recommended on Steam. The DLC costs $18.99. This is the highest selling DLC for the game according to the Steam page. January also saw the release of a free DLC including a new Skaven Lord. The next paid DLC, The Queen and the Crone, was released in May 2018. It included several new legendary lords and several new units, regiments of renown, new objectives, and new mechanics. The DLC mainly focused on bolstering the High Elf and Dark Elf factions. Priced at $9.99 USD, the DLC sits at a mostly positive 71% recommended. Along with the paid DLC, they also released a new free DLC, adding a new High Elf Legendary Lord. November 2018 saw the release of the paid Curse of the Vampire Coast DLC, adding a new playable race into the campaign and multiplayer. The objective of these new factions is to increase your infamy, and per the Steam page, each playable legendary lord must grow their dread reputation to become the most infamous pirate on the seas. Certain opposing pirate captains know the 3 verses of the ancient shanty, and as your infamy rivals theirs, they will seek to out you and attempt to destroy you. If you best each in battle, you'll learn each of these verses. all 3 of which are required to magically charge the Star Metal Harpoon. Only with the fully powered Star Metal Harpoon in your hand can you embark on the final fateful battle and bend the world to your will, and become the greatest sea scourge the world has ever seen. The DLC costs $18.99 and currently sits at a mostly positive 75% recommended. Curse the Vampire Coast is the second most popular DLC for the game. The free DLC that came along with this included a new Dark Elf Legendary Lord. The next content drop would arrive in April 2019. This included the paid The Prophet and the Warlock DLC. This DLC added new legendary lords for the Lizardmen as well as the Skaven. The Skaven faction comes with the Forbidden Workshop, which allows for the creation of new weapons and battlefield units. The Lizardmen faction comes with the new sacrificial gameplay mechanics. Priced at $9.99, this DLC looks to build upon the Skaven and Lizardmen factions. It currently sits at a very positive 82% recommended, and The Prophet and the Warlock ranks as the 3rd most popular DLC for Total War Warhammer 2. The free DLC that came along with this added a new Lizardmen Legendary Lord. In September 2019, the Hunter and the Beast DLC was released. This DLC introduced a new Empire Legendary Lord and a new Legendary Lord for the Lizardmen. The DLC also includes new units, regiments of renown, and gameplay mechanics. With the Empire faction focused on expansion with the unique mechanics around the challenges of imperialism, and the Lizardmen focused on maintaining their land and destroying the imperial settlements, the 2 factions are directly opposed to one another. The DLC sits at $9.99 USD and has a mixed rating of only 61% recommended. Many criticize the boring nature of the Lizardmen faction and the poor mechanics associated with challenging the Empire. The free DLC that came along with this added another new Lizardman Legendary Lord, and a second free DLC added some recruitable characters for the Empire. In December 2019, the Shadow and the Blade DLC came out. This introduced some more Skaven Lords and Dark Elf Lords. The Dark Elf faction experiences the unique mechanics around possession and the challenges of either accepting or rejecting their patronage, but allows for 2 unique starts. The Skaven faction focuses on espionage and hit-and-run tactics, providing new gameplay opportunities. Priced at $9.99, the DLC focused on expanding the Dark Elf and Skaven factions. However, it didn't prove very popular, with it having a mixed rating of only 68% recommended. Those criticizing this DLC say that the factions appear undeveloped and uninteresting when compared to the factions of the other DLCs that have released at this time. The free DLC that came out at this time also released a new Bretonnian Legendary Lord. In May 2020, right around COVID, the Warden and the Paunch DLC was added. This DLC added a new High Elf Legendary Lord and a new Greenskin Legendary Lord. The High Elf faction focused on defense, while the Greenskins focused on the offense. These 2 factions, similar to the other ones recently, focus on directly opposing each other, with the High Elf faction focused on defending against the Greenskins, and the Greenskins focused mainly on the offensive. The primary objective of this DLC was the final battle at the end between the High Elf faction and the Greenskins faction. Priced at $9.99 USD, this DLC sits at a mixed rating, with only 67% recommending it, saying that the DLC has a lot of bugs, and many people criticize the final battle as anticlimactic or even disorganized. The free DLC that came along with this introduced a new High Elf Legendary Lord. December 2020 saw the release of the Twisted in the Twilight DLC, which adds a new Skaven Lord and a new Wood Elf Lord. The DLC also includes several new units, regiments of renown, and mechanics. Similar to the other DLCs, these 2 factions look to fight against each other, with the Wood Elf faction protecting the Queen for the rituals required for their victory, and the Skaven looking to win by destroying the Queen. Priced at $9.99, this DLC sits at a mostly positive 74% recommended, saying that the Skaven faction holds more sway in the content over the Wood Elves. The free DLC that came along with this added a new legendary Wood Elf Lord, and in between the next content drops, a free DLC in March 2021 added a new Dark Elf Legendary Lord. In July 2021, the last of the content drops added a new paid DLC, The Silence and the Fury. It introduced a new Lizardmen Legendary Lord, as well as a Legendary Lord for the Beastmen. This DLC focused on the final battle in the Heart of Darkness between the Beastmen faction, focused on momentum, and the Lizardmen faction focused on fast travel and unique missions. Priced at $9.99, this DLC sits at a mostly positive 78% recommended, with many complaining of the need to buy DLCs for the full Lizardmen faction to be available. The last free DLC added a new Dwarf Legendary Lord. The last game update for Total War Warhammer 2 appears to have come in September 2021. Overall, the game saw very strong commercial and critical success. Gamealytic has reported that 4.3 million units have been sold on Steam, with the game bringing in an estimated revenue of almost $120 million. OpenCritic reports that the game had a critic score of 86 and a 93% recommended rating. Metacritic shows a similar perception, with a Metascore of 87 and a user score of 7.9. On Steam, the game also boasts a very positive rating at 93% positive reviews. Average player reviews from Steam echo a lot of common sentiments. Primarily, a lot of complaints about Total War Warhammer 2 is that it and its DLCs cost a lot of money. The DLCs costing so much money this far after release makes many people feel very frustrated. However, many people have praised the game's fun factor. Total War Warhammer 2 is addictive, and many players feel the need to play one more turn. This is a common sentiment with these types of games. So, many players, despite many issues they may run into, have fun with the game. That's very undeniable. However, if you do peer into the Steam reviews, you will see a lot of complaints about Creative Assembly as a whole. Many of them say that there's been a lot of corporate neglect around the Total War Warhammer franchise, with a lot of it even focused on Warhammer 2, despite the long-term content drops that they received. Some sentiments have changed since the December 2025 update, where they released some content for free to anyone that owns any of the Warhammer games. Others have recommended moving over to Total War Warhammer 3, as it feels like a more updated version of this game. Those who dislike the game have comparable hours to those who like it, though I feel like it is important to note that there are a lot of positive reviews with players with over 1,000 hours, some even dipping into thousands of hours. As of now, Total War Warhammer 2 still hosts a very healthy community of players, with the average sitting in the couples of thousands as of December 2025. However, peak concurrent players of the game happened in May 2020 during the Warden and the Paunch DLC drop, at a high of almost 85,000 players. This is likely due to COVID happening around the same time. Total War Warhammer 2 has a very high level of commitment to beat. If you're looking to go through a single campaign and strictly playing the main story, you're looking at about 42 hours. Most players spend around 138 to 173 hours playing through the game and its DLCs. However, if you're looking at a 100% of the game, you're looking at an incredibly high 747 hours. Without a sale, you can grab the base game for $60, and if you want to grab all the DLCs, you're looking at about an extra $110 USD. However, the base game can go on sale for as low as $15 and 75% off. In terms of achievement completion, around 73% of players have grabbed the first achievement, Neophyte. This achievement requires a player to complete a single ritual. However, if you're looking to complete the game, only 18% of players can boast about getting the final achievement. The final achievement requires a player to complete the final ritual of the game, regardless of whether it's single player or multiplayer. The rarest achievement of the game as of December 2025 is Sea Nile Crafter, and a low 0.7% of players having achieved it. This requires you to play as the Exiles of Nehek and craft everything within the mortuary cult. This requires significant time investment, but it also may be difficult to earn for many players, as some have reported it as being bugged. For system requirements, it is required to have at least 5 GB of RAM. For graphics, an NVIDIA GTX 460, AMD 5770, or an Intel HD 4000 is required. Storage requires 60 GB of available space. However, the recommended system specs include 8 GB of RAM, and for graphics, an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 770 or an AMD R9 290X. When it comes to my personal opinions about Total War Warhammer 2, I can recognize that many people enjoy the game. Friends of mine have recommended the game to me, and that's the reason it was my first game on PC. However, despite that, I could not enjoy it the way that they did. Perhaps it is only because I experienced a little bit of the game compared to them. I only got 7% of the total achievements, and my rarest achievement is Spoiling for a Fight, which about 33% of players have. That achievement, Spoiling for a Fight, only requires you to play a multiplayer battle. I could recognize that it's possible that this game just wasn't for me, and that at the time, the battle mechanics didn't reach me like it did for other people. A major issue I had with the game is the fact that the Immortal Empires campaign was recommended for me, but it is only accessible if you own both Warhammer 1 and 2, at least until December 2025. At that time, I could not access it despite the game telling me that I could. I didn't recognize at the time that you needed Warhammer 1, but it was so frustrating to me that I quite frankly just abandoned it to enjoy other games. See, at this time, I didn't have my Operation Backlog idea, and for this, I just wanted to enjoy having fun. But the Immortal Empires being what it was, and not being accessible was so frustrating to me that I could not enjoy the game. I felt that something was bugged or there was an issue that I was missing, and even if I did recognize that I needed Warhammer 1, I just wouldn't have done it. Buying an entirely new game just to play one extra DLC was so frustrating. The recent update in 2025 eliminated this barrier to entry, allowing anyone to access the Immortal Empires campaign, but has my opinion changed of the game since then? Not necessarily. I believe that locking an entire campaign behind buying the first game for a little less than a decade was a bad move from the developers. That type of structure was and still is a huge negative for me. I have a few friends who have played before that share this sentiment. It creates a negative vibe around the game, and the fact that they seem so money hungry is very disappointing. The monetary practices themselves turned people away from this game, at least in my experience. However, an interesting development that came from the December 2025 update was the fact that Creative Assembly gave out Total War Warhammer 3 for free to anyone who owned either of the previous Total War Warhammer games. Quite frankly, this is a move that surprised me. I can't exactly tell you if it's pro-consumer, but if you're a fan of the series and haven't already purchased the latest game, then it's a great gift from Creative Assembly, and something that I can't criticize too much. However, when we get back to Total War Warhammer 2, would I recommend the game? Maybe. If this is the type of game that you love, then it very well may consume your time like it did for my friends. However, if you aren't usually into these types of games, or the fantasy Warhammer franchise as a whole, then it could be a pass for you. The game is fun, I can recognize that. It isn't a poor game by any means, but it has its flaws. It has its issues. And you can't get a lot of the game unless you fork over a ton of extra money. So if you're interested in it, then I would recommend getting it on a deep sale. If you can get it for relatively cheap, then it's worth your time to at least try. The long-time support by developers, releasing free DLC alongside every other paid DLC, makes me recognize that they do have a passion for the game that deserves to be recognized and appreciated. Although, if you ask many fans of the franchise, they may tell you that they have their criticisms of Creative Assembly, and whether or not that's warranted or not, I can't say. I do struggle with a lot of the decisions made by Creative Assembly around the game. But with a lot of the recent updates in December 2025, if you never got into Total War Warhammer 2, then now might be a great time to try. Be aware that you're going to be dropping a lot of money to experience everything that this game had to offer. Total War Warhammer 2 isn't a bad game, but if you're interested, be aware of what you're getting into. Overall, I'd give it 2 out of 5 stars. If you can get the game, get it, but only if you can get it for really cheap. Total War Warhammer 2 is fun, but I'd give it a deep sale recommendation. Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. It really does mean the world to me. If you believe anything I provided today is helpful, then consider subscribing and liking the video. If you believe I've missed anything or have your own opinions around Total War Warhammer 2, then please jump into the comments and let me know. Is Total War Warhammer 2 worth the cost? After looking at the history of the game, the numbers, and my personal opinion, I believe that's up for you to decide. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and may luck be on your side.